the concept of media and social justice. That's very interesting actually, because it seems to me that media is guilty during the last few decades of social injustice. So we have been struggling, many people who thought that media should be doing something else, we have actually been struggling to introduce another vision, an alternative vision to what media could do in the world. Now, why am I saying so? Why do I think that media, to a large extent, mainstream media in particular, has been playing a negative role during the last 4 decades at least against the justice and the social justice and the diversity of the world, for 2 major reasons. Number one, media is a tool in the hand of the powerful. It is not a power on its own. And many people wanted to convince us that media is power. It is the 4th estate. It is the 4th branch of power that exists in any society. I always challenge that. I do believe that media, in fact, is a tool in the hand of the powerful and the wealthy. This, when media becomes a tool of achieving interest for those who own and those who have the say, rather than achieving interest for the masses and the public. So it is, number one, power-centered paradigm. It is not public-centered paradigm. Number two, and the most important element as well, media for the last few decades has been Western-centric in its approach globally. Western-centric in a sense that whatever we call now international media, most of it is in fact either owned or run or based in the West. During the last few decades, Europe and the United States of America internationally have designed an international system of power that controls, directs, and oversees the developments in the world based on what this major center of power, which is a Western center of power, thinks suitable, not for the universe, but suitable for the West. So media, again, has become a tool of that huge and massive center of gravity, which is Western in its essence, but also it is interest-driven, not social justice-driven in its mechanisms. And therefore, I argue that media, as I have known it, is not in fact an independent. It is a tool, and it is a tool in the hand of the powerful, and it is a tool in the hand of the powerful who are Westerners. Simple. Now, during the last 10 years, in particular, we have witnessed something different happening in the world. The world has become much bigger than being carried, directed, or run by the West. It's becoming huge, empowered with new mechanisms, with new tools. At least the internet, for example, social networking has introduced a concept which was not there 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Besides that, other centers of power started to emerge. We have China, we have Russia, we have the Arab world, we have Africa, and we have Asia trying to play a role. With the evolution of social networks and internet connection, I think the opportunity of sharing power and wealth has become much more easier than what it used to be 15 years ago. Therefore, in this case, media became a little, not very far, but a little bit much more diverse. But again, this diversity within media, it is true, it has become maybe a little bit less Western-centric because of the rise of other centers, but it has never abandoned the fact that it is a tool for in the hand of the powerful. Being the powerful Westerner or Easterner, or the powerful the one who is living in China or the one who is living in India or wherever it is. Most of the media of today is owned and run by those who are powerful, although it is a little bit much more diverse than what used to be. Now, why I do believe that we need a new approach to media, a new philosophy, a new paradigm, a new framework that might liberate media from these two major constraints and make it something else. What is that something else? What do I want and you would like to see media doing? Someone said we need media to spread social justice. Fantastic. Media could spread tolerance. Media could spread diversity. Media could introduce or share power. And media could introduce transparency. Media could add to the world, various aspects of understanding politics and international politics that the world is not accustomed to. Okay, that is fine. But the key to all of the above mentioned, that media should be people-centered. If media continue to be power-centered, it's not going to do all of the above mentioned. It might do something, part of it, to gain a little bit of legitimacy, but on long run, to emphasize on the interest of the powerful. So I would fit that under the category of deception rather than the category of credibility. Power-centered media. And the power-centered media is an approach that we need to establish carefully, because it is not yet something solid, structured, because it emerged initially from the idea of social networks. We have Facebook and the Twitter, and everyone could sit in front of his computer and do whatever he wants to do. However, that also has introduced an illusion of power, not real power. Illusion of media, not real media. And illusion of impact, not real impact. Because the fact that you sit behind the computer or you live within your Facebook or within your Twitter account and you have 10,000 followers or 100 or 1 million followers doesn't make you an actor. Why? Because within social networks, the social networking aspect of media, there is two important elements missing. Or two important elements missing. The first one is, in fact, the lack of priorities. So what could go viral, today is not necessarily what could matter. So most of our guys who are working in marketing, and I see some of them in this room, they would understand that the logic of what could go viral is not necessarily what is important or what is necessary for the public to know. There is a different logic, because the platforms are not established on priorities. They are established on popularity and interest that until now is not necessarily defined in a certain formulas and a scientific knowledge. Okay? So the lack of priority is important, as I could see. The number two element as well of social networking, it is again flat. No catalysts most of the time, and most of the time it does lack the concept of organization. So we have been struggling for years now, at least intellectually, to find out how could we gather this momentum of this flat networks of social communication and convert it into a center of gravity that produces media with a priority and with interest that could share power with mainstream media owned by corporations and governments. And until now, I think it has not been achieved. And we are in a process. All of us should be in the process of trying to do so. The positive aspect of social networking, that it is democratic, it is accessible, it is completely decentralized, so no one can easily control it directly. And until today, we see that although governments are moving very quick internationally to regularize, to make some laws for internet, but in my opinion, the genius mentality of the public, the crowd, will always generate solutions for the constraints that governments are putting on internet, simply because the flat network is much more clever than the pyramid-style government. The pyramid-style government is slow and is trapped most of the time in procedures and bureaucracy, and it is trapped in time. But people, as in public, are much more creative, much more mobile, much more capable of changing reality in a faster way. And therefore, the responsibility on them is less than the responsibility the government could have when it has to do the laws and regulations. In order to make a law, you need to go through months and months and months of negotiations within the Congress, for example, or within any other place, while in order to break the law, it takes one clever boy or girl sitting in their bedroom without any heavy constraints breaking the law of the internet. And I do believe the biggest crime that could be done to the wave of intellectual, cognitive, networking paradigm that is emerging in the world, the biggest would be is to constrain it by governments and make it subject to the interest of the hierarchical powers, because you will kill the spirit of it. This is a sort of something which suppose not to be organized, not to be controlled, and not to be legalized. It should legalize itself based on what people, their maturity and their understanding of things should matter. This is why I don't think that governments should be interested in internet or internet regulations or social networks regulations. Although some people might argue, what if internet could spread issues that are wrong? What if it could create chaos sometimes, or create social imbalance, or create certain tools for criminals to communicate? All of the above mentioned is less important than the positives that the internet could create through networking, which is creativity and ownership of the truth and falsehood by the crowd, where they become the judge, where become the people who decide what is right and wrong. Maybe you'll tell me now they can't, but they will in the future. It trusts them. At least I don't trust the governments. That's, everyone knows. You don't trust, no one trusts the government. But at least let us try if we could trust the crowd, the public. And in this case, they might be able to do something different. Now, I move a little bit forward to the following. I have been working in a mainstream organization, which is Al Jazeera Network, for years. I've been a correspondent, I've been a bureau chief, and then I became a managing director and the director general, and in touch with a lot of media organizations across the world. I differentiate between two things. Between the corporate level of media organization and the actual humans who are working within this organization. In my career, I have met with most magnificent people who have dedicated their life to truth. Journalists, editors, and producers within many newspapers and TV stations across the world, in the West and in the East, who have really sacrificed a lot for the sake of the integrity of the career and the profession. And I have met also, on the other hand, CEOs and directors and owners and board members who only have, in general, the interest of either profit or the interest of power. So we have two levels right now coexisting together, contradicting levels inside organizations. Great journalists who would love to do something really good for the public, and greedy CEOs and owners who would like to gain more money or more power. In my opinion, with this approach of public-centered media or people's-centered media, we would love to find a way. How could we connect those who would like really to live for the profession genuinely with resources developed, funded by the public in order to protect them from the hegemony of the corporation. Because most important element that we are facing, why can't we establish major organizations of media that is people-centered, is money, funding. I need money, give me money, because everything costs. Now, if you want money, you go to the bank, or to the corporation, or to the businessman, or to the government. Then we go back to the same cycle of people controlling. But can we develop mechanisms of public funding that could, or people funding, or crowdfunding, that could introduce means and tools, not necessarily huge, but minimal, in order to empower those who are genuinely interested in the profession to develop alternatives to the current media that we are suffering from. Why I'm saying so now? I'm saying so now because of very important issue you should notice. The corporate media of today is collapsing. During the last few years, because of the crisis in America and the West, we have seen major newspapers, major TVs, and networks for sale. Almost everything for sale today. I can count 10, 15 major newspapers and TV stations are for sale because they cannot survive in the age of economic crisis. They cannot survive because social networks are challenging them in advertising, so they don't have the same revenues. They cannot survive because social networks is challenging them in the free material, so they cannot very much achieve a lot of subscription as well. And they cannot survive also because their pyramid-like structure is very expensive to sustain. In an organization that you need to have a TV station, you might need 2,000-3,000 people to run it. But a beautiful website that could become viral and popular and fantastic, you need 10 to 15 or 20 people to run it. So this is easy to sustain, that is difficult to sustain. This is easy to gain advertising and subscription, that is difficult to achieve that. And therefore, we are witnessing at this moment in time a crumbling mainstream corporate media in front of us. We need to inherit the positives in it, and we need to leave the negatives out of it. This is why, in my opinion, it takes some good people to think of bridging this divide and creating the new model. And if that model should be created now, in this time and age, in this year and next year, when we are really going through this dramatic change in the media. I have attended a lot of meetings with mainstream media organizations to consult on the issue how to survive. People are panicking. They are panicking. They don't know how to gain money to sustain the heavy salaries and equipments and corporations and buildings and bureaus across the world, while the public can do alternatives. I am not convinced that corporate media could support social justice, but I am convinced that people-centered media could become social justice on its own. It could achieve to the public something that has never happened in our history. And why not? Since we are living in an age that has never happened in history. We have tools that has never existed before. When I was young in Palestine as a small kid, when you say journalist, for me it used to be equivalent, synonymous to a member of the intelligence agency. Because all journalists at that time were either propagating the state or lying. Propaganda was part of what intelligence agencies do. Media, TVs, newspapers, heads of news used to be appointed by intelligence agencies in the Arab world at that time. Now things have changed, of course, because they can't control everything. They would love to, but because they have lack of imagination and they have deeply political, backward way of thinking about media, they can't even control it. This is why Hosni Mubarak was surprised that Facebook and Twitter could create a revolution in Egypt, or the people in Tunisia could communicate, or the people of Syria could use Skype, and so on and so forth. Governments could not comprehend the danger emerging because they are accustomed to the hierarchical organizations controlled by them. So the surprise was important for us, but that's a window, will never last forever, because also governments are learning and trying to control. So this is why we need to move fast and move into a new paradigm of thinking and shift this whole gigantic, apparatus called media in order to become, again, in line with people wishes and people interest rather than centers of power. And hopefully with the weakness of centers of power as we see it right now across the world, we could really do something important about it. Thank you very much.
Obviously, Al Jazeera network is completely blown up in the last few years. It's gone from to literally being one of the biggest media networks in the world, but certainly in the region. I wanted to ask, what lessons do you think that we, as either young Muslims, the Muslim community, or as young people standing for truth, standing for justice within the West, what lessons could we take from the expansion of Al Jazeera? And you touched on a point about corporate media and how potentially it could never stand for social justice in essence. Is that a recommendation for us not to necessarily spend all our time engaging with the mainstream networks and to go on to things like the internet, or what's your...
Now, thank you very much. Two things you should, I think, in my opinion, would be derived from Al Jazeera experiences for the community or for the audience that we are addressing today. Number one, that when Muslims decide to do something, they could do it. In a way, we have lived, I speak about a region that I've come from, years and decades of inferiority complex, seeing that we can't do much. This is not our game. Media is not ours. Okay, someone else could do it, but not us. I think as we have people who are going into politics and become good politicians, and into media become good journalists, and into physicians and engineers and so on, I think this sector of opinion making is very important, and we should not be scared of going into it. And I think once we start working into it and learning it, it's easy for us to develop it. So there's nothing impossible in the field of achieving really good quality of media. The second one, mainstream. My advice to every one of you actually, break away from sitting in the corner, classifying ourselves as Muslims, doing things to the world. Let us be part of the world, doing things with others to the world. That's important. I have seen how much we lack allies in the world. Because also part of it, we should blame ourselves, because we always think of ourselves as a community that is living in a society, protecting its identity, afraid of opening up. Why are we afraid of what? Why are we afraid? I think we should become part of the world. When we fight for social justice, we fight for social justice with our colleagues and allies and the friends across the world. And I have witnessed that when I go visit Latin America or go visit South Africa or go visit wherever, you find people who are not less excited about changing injustice in the world than me or the one who is living wherever he is living in the Islamic world. We have allies everywhere. We need to work with them, not as independent Muslim entities, but part of this major mainstream. Really, that's important, and that's a huge transformation. I think that Muslims in the West in particular, they should try to figure out how could they become part of the societies that they are in, not only part of it as a groups, but part of it as mainstream as well, in politics, in media, and everywhere else. I think we should, at least the third generation, the fourth generation, they should do that. Otherwise, we will continue always to live in our own isolated zones. The third point, which you spoke about, whether we should speak to media, of course you should. It's part of the game. Of course you should. I mean, when you are participating for a cause, sometimes you do it in order to establish an argument that I asked and they didn't do it. And then you have to speak about it, because every organization and corporation is worried about their image, and they need to be held accountable for it. Or you could find within these organizations diversity itself, because I can't imagine an organization which is coherent and solid in its approach, be it editorial or be it whatever else. I give you an example. Here in London, we have the Telegraph. And you saw the Telegraph during the last few months ran two major mistakes, in my opinion. One of them was about HSBC, and they couldn't really cover it as they're supposed to. And then the other one was about the campaign they did about Qatar. And there was a great journalist called Peter Open who sent a fascinating letter of resignation explaining why he can't continue to work in the Telegraph, because the Telegraph has not done what it should do as a professional organization, and it seems that it has succumbed to the powers of the day, or to the centers of power. And it was amazing to see someone like him, who has been a chief columnist in the Telegraph, to decide that he has to come up and say the truth. Some people like that should be always approached. And I'm sure in the Telegraph, many others as well would share the same view, and they should be approached. So we shouldn't look at any organization as one solid black box. Within it, we will find many people who are eager to help, and we could communicate, and we could share with them, and we could always push for reform within these organizations.
Brilliant, thank you. I also wanted to ask about the Al-Sharq Forum, particularly the youth wing, and if you could tell us a bit about what role it's played in the Middle East, and whether it's, I know there's an international wing, I don't know if it's starting or if it started, and potentially what we as people within Britain, how we could play a role in either establishing something similar or in taking part in Al-Sharq.
Yeah, the idea actually of a Sharq Forum started when this region went into our region, the Middle East, went into a state of transformation. I don't like to call it chaos. I would love to prefer the word transformation, because we are going through transformation. And transformation, part of it is chaotic. Part of it is painful. Part of it is hopeful. Part of it is massive. I mean, this is how transformation anywhere in the world happens. It happened here in Europe, it happened in America, everywhere. However, the idea was that the think tank, or the Sharq Forum, consists of politicians, analysts, economists who sit together and think collectively for the region and the transformation in the region. But also, I thought that there is a huge decline of elite in the Arab world, in the Islamic world in general. The elite does not exist anymore, because either they were co-opted by governments, or they were expelled from public sphere, and therefore we have this huge vacuum of social and cultural and philosophical and geopolitical understanding of the reality. So where should we turn our faces? To the young people. The young generation, in my opinion, who have been able to break away from the norm of being subjugated to powers, as in case of Egypt or Tunisia or Yemen or Libya or the rest of the Arab world, I think they will be capable of producing young elite that could think differently and have different imagination and hopes from their from us. So I think a Sharq Forum did something which no other think tank has done, establishing something called a Sharq Youth Forum. And it is entirely consists of young people from across, not actually only the region, but from across the world. And these are people who are committed to social justice, people who are committed to creativity, people who are committed to diversity, and they think that the world should be a much better place to live in. We are connecting them together, and we are empowering them with tools to develop their own thoughts. And the most important thing of a Sharq Youth Forum, it is a network, not an organization. Represent what I have been talking about here. It is a network that is flat. It has different circles, political, economic, and social, and media. And within each track, people communicate within each circle. They have their own catalysts. They develop their own initiatives, and they run it across the world. So everyone, of course, is invited to join. It's not exclusive, and anyone could become part of it and could participate in it. And the one who adds to the network automatically becomes, a leader within the network. And the one who doesn't, he becomes only an observer. It is the justice system within a democratized network rather than a hierarchical structure of an organization.
So is this just within the Middle East, or is this also?
No, it is across the world. And as you said, we have, yes, an international wing, and we have with us Mr. Mohammed Zod, who's sitting there in the back from Australia. And he is actually running this circle of the international youth. So anyone can talk to him, and he can register and enroll in the Sharq Forum.